We're good? Mike?
A thesis of an architectural dialogue between light and form,
Hold on.
biomimetic form fighting in response to daylight.
Stop
Hold on.
Okay, let Yutong do his job.
Yeah, let's do the intros and then we'll get going.
Okay,
Yeah, we're live.
if the rest of you wouldn't mind muting.
Yep.
Okay, and we lost a few people or what?
Oh, I think we're still all here.
Yeah,
So we have David Correa, Mike, Chichi, which I've not met, so hi. And so I just want to start by welcoming all of you and giving up your time. And I'm representing Marco in the department, but he's here, so he can say hi to the rest of you. We have two guests. I do not know Mark at all, so I'm really sorry if you do not mind introducing yourself to the rest of the world. I'm sure we have a global audience spanning time zones.
Sure. Mark Cici from HOK Architects here in Toronto. I'm the global director of director of design technology.
Excellent, thank you. And David, I believe you are a Ryerson graduate.
Yes, I am.
And you, I believe, are at Carleton right now?
I'm sorry?
You are teaching at Carleton University?
No, I teach at Waterloo. So
Waterloo,
nearby, sorry. Yes. And
okay,
I have a small office in LL Lab in Shanghai.
Okay. When it's outside of Ryerson, it's the rest of the world. So it might as well be Timbuktu. Anyway, do you care introducing yourself?
Myself, yeah. I don't know. What can I say? I went to Ryerson, had a fantastic time, great instructors, and I kind of started traveling the world. So I lived I studied in Calgary, the Yukon territories, and then in Germany for over 5 years. And my expertise is in robotic fabrication and advanced materials, looking at shape-changing materials and complex composites. And now I'm teaching at Waterloo, kind of leading the advanced fabrication and robotics sort of area of research.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So the presentation itself, we basically have a 5-step process. Ngan will get about 20 minutes to do her presentation. And after that, we will open up the floor for clarifications for Ngan. And after that, the defense will start with Q&A from, of course, Vince, Jason. I'm the departmental rep. I normally just offer comments. And then, of course, our two guests today. And we will wrap up with some last words from Ngan. And then we will adjourn into some private space. I do not know what the setup is. Today's my first defense. I suspect we will have a meeting room set aside in Zoom for that.
We simply ask Ngan to leave the meeting.
Okay.
And then we stop live streaming.
Okay.
And then we just continue the meeting in private.
Okay. Yeah, very primal. So that works. That works for me. Okay, Ngan, so you have about 20 minutes, and about 5 minutes towards the end, I will signal you with my hand. If I don't get your attention, then I will yell at you. Okay, you can go.
An enemy's form. The light-form relationship occupied the realm of biology. Over generation, organic forms rely upon sunlight to function and survive. And this natural force fosters architectural from within the design process. The architectural proposition in this thesis aims to delineate the biomimetic principle from leaves to apply architectural envelopes for daylighting control with thermal consideration. Although rooted in environmental forces and functionality, the exploration takes a step further than conventional passive design to construct an emergent perspective, a return to functionality. In the chaotic world of matter and energy, architectural form evolves actively and autonomously through forces in their elemental composition. Fundamentally, the forces or the information hidden behind the form variation originate from the functionality that it carries. This shed light upon biomimetic design where the organic form alters and adapts based on the functional inquiries towards survival and evolutionary essence. On Gottfried Semper's proposition about mathematical function of architecture, forces request the change of forms. Every work of art is a result, or using a mathematical term, it is a function of an indefinite number of quantities or powers, which are the variable coefficients of the embodiment of it. Forces in the architectural form were once equated to the iatromechanical system, coined by Descartes, which accommodates a series of discrete parts functioning as organs and bodily systems according to purely mechanical principles. The problem is the form invented from the predetermined expectation and misapprehension of natural forces will eventually direct architecture to utilitarian machinery. Nature suggests a feedback loop on which the variation of form requests the change of its original function, resulting in a new form of function, a multifunctionality. This dialectical relationship opened a discussion toward nature where architects have found brilliant recipe to apply in form-fitting design. Biomimetic buffer zone. Leaves are one of the most vulnerable organs of plants with soft tissue, thin membranes, and external location to handle the photosynthesis. Leaves epidermis contain a buffer zone located just at the external boundary of the stomata layer. The boundary layer is a thin zone of calm air that surrounds each leaf. The thickness of the boundary layer influences how quickly gases and energy are exchanged between the leaf and the surrounding air. The bioinspiration from the boundary layer has not been a surprising idea seeing the appearance of storm windows on the building envelope. Likewise, in the double skin facade, the thermal space between two glazing layers precisely resembles the boundary layer on leaves. The functional goal of this buffer zone is, in the tree system, is to enhance the insulation capacity while maintaining adequate sunlight access for the body. Plants adjust their boundary layer thickness around leaves through the development of and configuration of hair or pubescence. The hair, so-called trichomes, usually take spherical shapes with transparent material to form into minuscule bubbles. This feature allows trichomes to maximize its air buffer zone without blocking the necessary amount of sunlight entering photosynthetic cells beneath. The field of architecture has stated the biomimetic functionality of air for centuries under theoretical and technical circumstances. To fully understand and transcend the application of air in pneumatic designs. At a higher level of organic development or evolution, air is no longer a basic chemical supply, rather an integrated force. In 1961, Fry Otto started to conduct experiments with soap bubble, which can merge, keep the least enclosed surface as a cluster, and automatically construct a flat common wall between every two members. Organic cell and body parts make use of the principle to increasingly construct series of units to support each other. A single and large individual of any pneumatic forms is very fragile and unstable under external pressure and easily end up with undesirable deformations. However, in 1968, A group of utopian artists, theorists, and architecture students glorify air in a single unit as a magical source to construct inflated inhabitant for human. In terms of material use, they were successful at containing air inside a high transparent skin made of nylon or PVC. When functioning in building of a larger scale, the failure of the single pneumatic form were disclosed in the first two design options of U.S. Pavilion for Expo 70 in Osaka in 1968. Unlike massive exhibition pavilion and temporary installation, the air cavity was first used in 1903 as an insulated layer to reduce heat gain in summer and heat loss in winter for basic office space, thanks to the low thermal conductivity of air. Inspired by a more stable structural geometry of soap bubble and expansion, and the expansion of the boundary layer on leaves, ETFE pneumatic facade became a catalyst for liberating the rigid form of conventional double-skin facade. The first ETFE building was the Eden Project, designed by Grimshaw Architects in 2000. After the Eden Project, many descendants of the ETFE system have been spawned over the course of 20 years as a default of immediate solution of daylighting forms. However, these type of envelopes enclose merely a massive space for sport activities or exhibition, where daylight variations are not critical as in deep space office and mixed-use building with multiple stories. In 2010, by adding more pneumatic chamber in a unit, ETFE panels in a multi-story building named Media TIC, designed by Enric Ruz Gelli, can vary their transparency across the facade area to adjust daylight access, opening a new paradigm in responsive pneumatic envelopes for daylighting design. Investigating contemporary building facade from a biomimetic point of view, the thesis attempts to integrate higher performance traits of functionality, materiality, and stability in a new multifunctional pneumatic envelope. Material capacities. Unlike properties, which are finite with time and space and strictly defined in measurement, a material capacity is always subtle, potential, and relational. On its ways, expressing its hybrid performance with pattern of material distribution, coming closer to the responsiveness and flexibility of biological tissue. The material selected for fabricating pneumatic daylighting components must emulate similar property to those from nature. In Oxman's article related to variable property design, she claimed that designers can dynamically mix and vary the ratio of different materials in order to produce a continuous gradient. Also, thanks to the liquid base, silicon rubber can occupy and copy almost all micro detail of a mold, which can be measured and digitally produced in advance via 3D printing. ETFE's lower elasticity confine pneumatic unit into fixed frame and cannot vary unless there is a change in the grid pattern. As silicon is softer, it can withdraw to its normal state after deflation. Softness and body compliance are significant features normally apparent in biological systems, which contribute to a more natural interaction with their environment. The experiment with plastic sheets showcased an emergent curvature resulting from a variation of pneumatic patterns. However, by differentiating thickness and merging more than one hardness value in casting process, a silicon panel can expand dynamically under the same intake of air pressure with the same surface pattern. On a vertical distribution, pneumatic panel unify on-day lighting component on an envelope including shading devices, blind, and windows. On a horizontal distribution, this prototype investigates the inflation level of the cells that can adjust daylight based on the sun orientation and floor plan layout. To apply and validate the materiality in association with digital modeling, the design project in this thesis proposes a pneumatic facade that can control daylight and mitigate visual discomfort for a deep floor plan office building. The project is positioned in the city of Toronto, where the high living density and expense lead to pack and shadow lots, challenging any new construction of productive working spaces. The chosen size has typical 3 cover size and only one front side that allows direct daylight access to the open area of St. James Park in the Sound. From a single mass, avoid fillet the front to get more daylight from the south direction, and another void divides the mass into 2 parts, forming an atrium at the core. This boundary of the least daylit area drives the profile of void that creates the atrium. The cutting profile has to be mirrored to offset the lack of daylight level therein. During the massing process, floor area is also managed based on the other economic factors. The building model emphasizes more on the envelope for a contemporary open layout office. They seek to define a process of assessment and analysis from which to derive an aware and targeted project to get the most out of the luminous performance in interiors, aiming to achieve a threshold value of comfort. There are 2 models for the illuminance analysis. The first one with fully glazed envelopes suffer with excessive sunlight on the top floor, while the atrium space above the ground level faces the problem of lack of daylight. In the Model 2, a uniform pneumatic system afloat on the conventional curtain wall can diffuse the light excessiveness. However, directing daylight further to the core relies on the inflation level of each pneumatic panels on the system. This inflating dynamics of all local panels relate proportionally to the illuminance evaluation on each floor plan where the panels are installed. The illuminance map on each level is subdivided into 12 projected planes to interpret its numerical scale into the vertical distribution of pneumatic cells with a setting of balance threshold of 300 lux. By setting the variation of hardness, mimicking different types of silicon rubber, the numerical values of illuminance are remapped into the inflation factor in Grasshopper. The overall dimension and locality of the unit agree to the same grid-based metric, according to the commercial and industrial availability of the curtain wall panel of 4 feet by 6 feet or 1200 mm by 1800 mm which will be potentially convenient for the fabrication of pneumatic components in reality. In comparison to the fully glazed model, the daylight distribution in the pneumatic model is more even, maintaining comfort and productivity for the occupants. Construction feasibility. The section displayed the array of pneumatic panels on south and north sides of the building. Overall, one story can hold 2 rows of pneumatic panels. When the instantaneous presence of light has been caught, it can be controlled and fixed through the self-shading and self-regulating scheme. Additional vertical framing support helps anchor the horizontal element, including brackets, floor grate, and the curtain wall, instead of merely maintaining shaft. The balcony open accessibility to user. This requires an alignment of interior and grade floor level. The extension of the pneumatic facade onto the parapet wall prevents moisture and rain coming inside, making a continuous water and air ties for the thermal corridor. The method of installing the silicone units is similar to sewing them together onto the cables and sliding them along the string to stabilize 4 edges. The connection detail between the brackets and the cable are inspired by tensile structure. These are 2 stages of deflation and inflation of the facade. Front view also displays the translucent differentiation of the pneumatic panels, open the view to the outdoors. Finding an optimal level of light simply through the achievement of threshold level established as a priori is not the ultimate goal of the thesis. Rather, the thesis design research has questioned and tested a possible convergence where biomimetic design, digitality, and materiality are exercising on to arrive in a hybrid and emergent form of the building envelope that speaks for the 3 domains. The design method in this thesis seeks to find application not only in new construction, where the technological component can be easily integrated with the building envelope, but also in existing edifices in the case of energy, retrofit, and environmental concerns. So this is the end of my presentation.
Okay, and that's it. There's no other oral presentation beyond the video. Okay, good. Thank you. Exactly on time. So that's a good thing. I'm gonna just open up the floor to any questions from the audience or the floor on points of clarification on her presentation. David, you unmuted yourself. Do you have a question to ask?
That's not why, but yes, I could ask a question for now. Can you just clarify on your inflatable structure? Is there how does the person can see right through them? Is the idea that when they're thin you can see right through them, and when you're inflated you have some kind of diffuse aspect, or is there a spacing where you can actually see right through from the inside of the building? I couldn't quite figure that out.
So most of the time, the silicone unit just to diffuse the daylight, And only at the point of the window, at the position of the window, there are some very transparent unit of silicon that can allow the user can look through it.
Okay, so you're always seeing through the silicone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, are there any other questions? Maybe from Mark, perhaps?
Yeah, so I've actually done a significant number of this kind of building type, unfortunately, in my career. And I would say that, so there's two perspectives of this. And actually, I guess the question is, which one are you kind of addressing at the end of the day? But, there's kind of, I would say the old model or the less creative model is that, you give a shell to somebody and the space within it is then kind of customized and defined based on that shell. But I think that the way that, and I work on a lot of these projects now, and the way that things are actually working now and changing, I guess I would argue for the better, is that the design is actually more inside out, meaning it's the program that drives what happens on the exterior. And I wonder, in a situation like that, I guess there's a two-part question. One is, do you see what you've done here as being solely applicable to this building type? That's number one. And I guess the second part is, how does it acknowledge the fact that, the building is more than just a shell and is driven mostly by the internal use? Because from what I see in this particular instance is that this is largely kind of a facade study, not so much how the concepts of what you're developing on the facade work themselves into the internal guts of the thing. So those are kind of a two-part question, I guess.
So the first question is about the building type. So usually this type of facade can apply in any type of building, but because it can vary and adapt to the daylighting level. But I use it for the office building specifically because it's better for the deep floor plan that very in need of the design for a better daylighting access.
Okay, but I mean, what also, I mean, you're looking at a 10-story example. What happens when it's 35? Does it still work?
I think so, because when it's higher, the measurement of the luminance level we just vary and coordinate with the inflation of the pneumatic units.
How does it affect the core then? Right, because I think you're relying upon some light coming down the middle, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you've got, I mean, I don't mean to augment and take this a whole other direction, but I'm just, when you make a statement like it can work for any building type, I mean, let's just say for a minute, let's limit the scope of this and say, let's just look at this building type. The building type you've chosen, there's a wide degree of flexibility in terms of scale, right? So right now at 10 stories, if you are reliant or dependent upon a core element that allows you to bring light in, that works at 10 stories. But at 35, are there other ways to get light into the core? These are just questions I'm asking you. I'm not trying to be facetious or difficult. I'm just wondering.
So in my thesis research, I also look at a lot of light shell that guide the light from the atrium, the top of the atrium, based on the reflection of the material of the tube. And they use the reflection position of different mirror plane to adapt the light and then transfer it into different position of the during the core of the building.
Mhm. I mean, if it's a modularization, like if there's a kind of a module, like let's say that you've seen that, you know, in 10-story increments, you can handle the redistribution of, you know, if it's about
Yeah.
light, right, which it is. And so it takes 10-story modules to essentially allow that same level of performance. Then I would just argue that, you know, like what you're proposing right here is a solution at 10 stories, but that is scalable, right? Because to me, that's the question. I mean, everything doesn't always have to be big, right? But I think that, you know, by testing, say, the type thoroughly, it exhibits that it is a highly flexible and robust solution. That's all where I'm going with that.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And since Mark has kind of started the Q&A, the defense, I'm just going to actually let him finish his thought, if you will, with the questions, and I'm going to ask David, and I'm going to apologize to Vincent and Jason that if there's any clarification questions you have for Ngan, we can bring that up in the defense discussion. So Mark, you still can have the floor if you have any other comments that you want to make beyond the first two that you had already made.
I would just, the only other thing that kind of strikes me, I think I've kind of finished that statement, but the only other thing that I was looking at is I have your thesis book open here, and I was just looking at what I actually found really helpful, to be honest, is that there's a really great diagram that I think you've clipped out from somewhere on page 11, which talks about biomimicry taxonomy. And when I looked at that, I thought, well, that seems to me like a phenomenal kind of target or agenda to be able to parameterize, I don't know, that's not a word, I just made that up. The kind of functional elements, it seems like that whole pinwheel idea seems like, and we kind of had a similar conversation this morning about the role of variables and parameters in this process. And I think it's kind of I think it's a theme that's kind of coming up again here, because it basically you're using that to help guide some design decisions, right? Or even functional decisions. And I'm wondering, you know, if you've got such a great kind of reference in terms of taxonomy, it's almost like you could build your own taxonomy with your research that refers to that wheel, that is kind of a language that is adaptable and that is parameter driven, that you can use for kind of like a system, essentially, that you could refine over time. I mean, these are kind of the things that, so the procedural process of architecture is that, you know, as we learn things, we kind of add them to our toolkit, which is like expanding upon the taxonomy, I guess you could say, in that regard, to help refine and make like a version or a Gen 2.0 sort of thing. It's just an observation that I found that I don't think, I mean, it was a very strong graphic to me and a lot of information that I don't think resonated or embedded itself. I mean, it was an initial graphic that I found, but I didn't see it kind of working its way through the material and the rest of the thesis. And I thought that it was an excellent opportunity for you to kind of use it as, or leverage it as a starting out point in whatever scripts or content you had further down the line to illustrate, here is the relationship between these things and how I've developed my own taxonomy or something like that. So having your own taxonometric, again, another word that doesn't exist, diagram that exposes what it is, the research you've done and what you've developed. Sorry, that's my last comment.
So Ngan, so this is more of a comment, and I one thing about Zoom is that we can zoom in, pardon the pun, on body language. So I can see David about to jump into something. So I'm just gonna have him kind of hold back a little bit and let Ngan respond to Mark's comment. Did you discover what Mark discovered when you were doing those taxonomic? And if you, yes or no, simple as that. If you actually pursue it, or you just felt that it would not really benefit you. This is more for Mark's benefit. And then I'm going to let David jump in. Ngan? Did you discover the things that Mark just responded to just now on page 11, the taxonomic study? Did you discover that as well too? And if you did, how did you respond to it? You just felt that it was not going to take you to the direction that you might want it to go, or you did explore it and it didn't come out in the thesis document?
I put a lot of my experiment and about the parameter throughout the development of the pneumatic, like the evolution diagram that I made is more connecting also pneumatic biology together, and it's not just merely dwell on the biological theory, because it's quite challenging to me to read through one of them academic article about biology. So I try to in between about architectural pneumatic facade and biology to find the conversion and the similarity.
Okay, so the response is somewhat yes, and you've taken it to a parametric study. So I'll let Mark respond to it a little bit later, but I think David actually had a point of interjection in the middle of one of your other clarifications. I'm going to let David ask some questions, and then maybe we can sew these two together.
Maybe, yes. Ngan, I'm trying to, so let me see if I understand what you did. So you looked at those kind of outer layers of the leaves, and you look at the sort of spherical elements and the sort of small microturbulence and increased surface area around them as a way to, well, that film, sort of air film around them, increase the insulation value. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
This
and
is
then
an expansion of thermal corridor of the...
Yes, so that sort of dissipates some of the heat, correct?
Yeah.
On the cells, and depending on how those cells expand and contract, then there's more or less, depending on the type of climate, they actually be able to adapt to those changes, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so then you abstracted that and you turn it into sort of mechanically into these inflatable bladders that then will do a very similar sort of shape transformation. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the part that I'm a bit confused is that you're then correlating that not only to heat gain, but to light transmission. Is that correct? Or is it still still more or less about heat dissipation around the surface?
It's more about the daylighting, because I try to vary the transparency of the material.
Yeah.
So this kind of biological principle need to be validated by the silicon and materialization process that I make in the prototype.
So the prototype is trying to look at whether the material can have the behavior, the elastic behavior, and the variability that you're looking for by instrumentalizing sort of those channels, which you can use to sort of give a gradient of change, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So the part that, and the lighting transmission, how did you validate it that this depth of the bladder also affected the light transmission? How do you validate it as that aspect?
So I measured it in the design project. I measured with the luminance level, and then remap it into the level of the factor of inflation in grasshopper.
So the luminance level was measured on the physical prototype, or was it sort of speculated on the facade?
I measured it from a model, digital model that I construct.
And so, and the digital model had some coefficient for translucency, or how did that kind of parameter came into being? So I'm trying to understand, how do you know that sort of inflating more is going to mediate? Because we know that we're starting with one idea about air circulation, and now we're translating to light. So I'm trying to understand how did that parameter translated into light?
So I have to set up the model into the right position of Toronto and the site location, and then I try to construct the similar properties of transparency into the digital model and then tested it with analysis of the luminance. And in different analysis, I'm
Okay.
gradually
Okay.
closer to the
So sorry, I'm digging into this because I'm actually genuinely interested. So I want to understand if the bladder is inflated and becomes much wider, right?
yeah.
Does that mean that there's less light going through or there's more light going through?
This will be more light going through.
More light going through.
Thinner.
Sorry, Mark, you said something?
Oh, I was just gonna say, is that because the membrane becomes thinner and therefore it transmits more light?
Uh-huh.
So
That's the idea, right?
Yeah.
my exterior facade has like an arrangement of 8 bubbles,
Uh-huh.
and each 2 bubble will represent a shading device. For example, can you see on you can see on this slide, the very top 2
Yeah.
bubbles will represent the height window that can let the light access very deep into the floor plane.
Okay.
This
So-
is very fast.
So then so there's actually a contradiction then when in the images that you show that there's windows where the membrane is flat, then actually I wouldn't be able to see much through there because there will be less light going through it. Wouldn't that be correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
So at the position of glare and discomfort for the user, the bubble will be very flat and become opaque, more opaque.
More opaque.
Yeah.
Okay, so then what you're saying is every time it inflates, there's more light, everything there's less inflation. So at all points, you're still seeing through this membrane. That's the other part of it. Okay. Okay. I don't think I have to think about this a little bit because it's a bit of a, I mean, the only question I will have, I guess, in terms of formal, it seems that you analyzed sort of geometries that were fairly complex in the way they worked, right? They were kind of these bubbles that were kind of associated with each other, and then you translated them into very longitudinal elements, right?
Yeah.
So it was kind of, it seems like an odd parity of the two. Would you expand as to what that parity kind of came about?
So the bubble, each bubble can inflate, but because of the facade need to be sealed, airtight, and watertight, so it need to be 4 sides of the bubble need to be anchored into the cable, and only the surface that can make an immersion curvature.
So each pocket is inflating individually, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, the last question I have, wouldn't it make sense if we had the same geometry without inflating it, but it's static, right? And it has the same sort of configuration, what would be the loss?
Can you repeat it?
So if we had the same outer geometry of the bubbles, right, of the outer shell, and it has the same gradient, but it's kind of customized to some light coming in some areas and some less light coming on the others, what would be the difference to having them sort of have the capacity to actuate them? What would be the main loss? What are we losing?
The main loss? So that you mean that the downside of the
Yes.
So right now the disadvantages of this one will be when I research about it, it will be about the maintenance, like compared to ETFE, because ETFE is like so powerful, has been so powerful for a long time, and this one more flexible, but it is like so similar to the organic scheme. The more flexible, the more it can like absorb and like contain the dirt. So I think about the further development of this material that can be coated with some kind of material that that can keep it out of dirt and better for construction and in use of mass construction later.
I think I know where you're going with this, David. I think another way of asking the question is, what is the advantage of having the pillowy facade versus having all of the, I don't know what to call it, the plastic or ETFE, whatever it is, being, say, marginally inflated as opposed to these giant bubbles? Like, what is the advantage to having the giant inflatable bubbles, period?
So this one, with the ETFE, it cannot vary, the pattern of the ETFE cannot have to be varied when the bubble is inflated. But with this material, I can only have one type of pattern and just cast and mold the silicone material to make the bubble bigger. And I don't have to change the rigid frame of the building, especially when the building is already a provisional one that I received from a different site or a different like architect. Now I can just modify and adapt to the existing building.
Okay. Can we let that thought hang for a little while? And I want to bring in Vince and Jason, because hopefully in their line of questioning, it could shed some light onto some of the remnants of your questions. I'm referring to Mark and David. So I'm going to ask Jason first if there are any questions, defense questions that you might have, and then Jason is the second reader, and then I'm going to ask David, Vince, who is the supervisor.
So Ngan, I want to talk about the control of the facade of the occupants. Okay, so if someone is utilizing a space programmatically, what type of control do the individuals have in their own space? So are they able to set illuminance levels to counteract the let's say active facade, right? So is it a passive exclusively, or do you have some sort of application process? Maybe it's like through an application or your cell phone or whatever it is that you can dynamically change those spaces via your facade.
So when I researched about this will adaptively react to the daylighting via a sensor. So sensor will be attached on each panel, but the user cannot control it because individually, each person have their own requirement of the visual expectation. So if you leave the sensor or the measurement to the users, will be very unpredictable. So it needs to be centrally controlled by a sensor and programming.
Would you consider another layer to be an advantage to the system so that you could potentially adapt your facade to quite literally the programmatic experience? So for example, if I was in a boardroom and I needed to do a presentation where I needed almost no light, how would I be able to modulate the facade in order to facilitate that type of work?
Oh, that I haven't thought about that, because the facade right now is like for the overall daylight access.
Yeah, so could you start to fold in a control system that separates itself from the dynamicism of the facade, the fact that it has to solely rely on the illuminance levels of the sun? Could we, add in that extra layer to have occupant control, and then, the dynamicism of program then becomes a factor of your facade?
So I think in that context, each facade of my of the building need to be tied into the interior functional. Like each room or each floor can have access to the system, the programming system of the panels. And when the building works, we can see like the variation of the bubble during the day. Because right now I can just manage the bubble to expand and contract in the periods of seasonal daylighting. It cannot vary like continuously, like hour by hour. It would mess up with the system.
I appreciate that, but I think that there could be that extra layer, right? And I think you know why, right? Because the occupants are losing control of their environments right now. It's based solely off of your digital infrastructure, that whatever remapping that you've associated to the amount of illuminance, that's the only control system that the building has right now in terms of modulating light. And so I think that's a disadvantage in the system, where the individual needs to be able to have some sort of control, just like I can open up my window in my office to allow a little breeze into my working space, right?
I would agree. I would say that conceptually, the premise of the inflating and deflating, let's say, to stretch the membrane or weaken the membrane for transmission is kind of just that. It is the concept, and that there are several layers and permutations of the same concept that would give more occupancy control over the situation. So instead of having one tensile membrane, there could be 2 layers. And instead of it being inflated, there could be sections, to David's point, that are in tension, right? And so it's the combination and the layering of the premise and the concept that actually creates more juxtaposition and flexibility in the system.
Yeah, Yutong, is it okay if I comment on this at this point in time?
Yes, please. I was actually gonna.
Okay. Yeah.
I was just gonna actually tie Jason's comments back to Mark's when he was questioning earlier on if this expression on the outside is driven by the program within the building. So Mark actually, thank you for closing up that loop.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna invite. I know David has a comment to make, but I want to invite Vince to come in and talk to that.
Actually, you know what, David, you by all means comment now, because I just got some macro ones based on just what's been said earlier. So I think that what you have to offer will probably fall under the same umbrella. So please go to
I mean, yeah, at this point I don't have much of a question. Is more a comment. I think, and I really commend you the sort of like you have a conviction. Maybe put it that way. You have a very good conviction about how this is doing. What you believe is doing. I think it does to some degree support that. I think your process of looking at a biological process and actually finding ways to implement it, I think is quite valuable. I think the difficulty, it starts to fall through when you're actually making it sort of functional in a way that it starts to address all the other dimensions of the system, right? So, I mean, I think aesthetically, I think is not necessarily the best showcase of its potential, right? Like you cannot have, you start with these ideas of very meticulously, nicely subdivided, functionally graded structures that nature has, and then you end up with a regularized grid of bubbles. Not even bubbles, they're actually kind of pockets, right? They're like pillows in essence, rectangular pillows. And I think, and it's not necessarily that that's necessarily bad, but if that's sort of the abstracted model, one would expect that you will find an application that really highlights that geometry as being the main feature, right? Because in this case, you're both the person who's abstracting the principle and then also the person who's designing the application, right? In some cases, we're kind of the opposite. We get a project and then we have to find a system and try to make it fit. But in this case, you kind of have the opportunity to do both. And I think Mark's point of, is this really the only building and how can it be upscale or not, are extremely valid, because that's where it starts to fall through as a project, as an idea. If I were to be doing your building, I would think that perhaps a more organic subdivision of the bubbles that perhaps have some areas that are a bit empty, because that's where some key spaces exist, and some areas that are, perhaps static, because maybe they don't change as much. Like, for instance, I don't think we need to be changing as much the parapet, right, as the image that you're projecting. I don't think that those bubbles need to be constantly being fluctuating. Does that make sense?
I used to try to make these panel like can be undulating, and because I try to make a model with the tectonic that matches those requirements, but it's so like because of the pandemic, the shop would close. And
But it's not just about the shop. It's about conceptually, you know, if you couldn't make it in the shop, you could have designed the building with some of that kind of intuition embedded into it. So again, I commend your ambition, but I think you need to sort of, as an architect and a designer, also look at the aesthetics of it, look at what it's expressing and how it might relate in a way that maybe even carries more of those initial sort of intuitions, right? And initial sort of abstractions that you're using. And Mark's point about looking at that diagram and taking a closer look as to how those different components might play a role in other aspects of your design, I think is really valuable. The challenge that I have with your argument is that it starts in a very grand biomimetic level. It talks about how plants use tropism, move towards light, and then we end up with a pillow, right? So in some ways, I wish it would have been about like, okay, I'm gonna take just one principle and then I'm gonna expand it, right? And I'm gonna understand what that does. And then I'm gonna see what the key application is. But you're sort of, you're trying to play kind of these both parts. So like I'm doing all biomimetics. And then when we look at the building, there's all those biomimetics are not quite there the way the way one needs to sort of actively evaluate them. I think that's sort of where the challenge is. But again, your ambition is great, and you're trying to carry some of these things through. But being a bit more critical as to how they apply would be greatly beneficial to you moving forward.
Vince?
Yeah, thanks, Yutong, and thanks, David. That comment's a good place for me to start, because as much as there is ambition there, David raised a good point that where you start with biomimetics, you really aren't very clear about the essential issue, which I have, is the communication of how you actually embarked upon taking on your project from that biomimetic lens into what you got at the end, right? So I have, for myself, I'm just kind of keeping inventory very quickly of things that have been raised that you really should be better at articulating. Again, communication, which is like, what are the key benefits of having this system? How was it derived? You know, when David, you know, who knows a lot about how you know, we do data analysis and computational generation of form and stuff, he's even still perplexed at figuring out how and the logic that went into going and making things, right? I think we also have questions that come about from how it's operated and how it's controlled, as has been raised by both Mark and by Jason, right? And just how do you integrate it into the real operations? And now I want to come back to the issue of the discussion about the types of units that you got. I find it very strange that there's a bit of a discussion in my mind, and I wrote it down in my own notes, about whether or not you're actually really aware of the architectural application, or if you're just simply applying a product that you've developed that you really have a fascination with, right? Because on one hand, we look at the architectural proposal that you got right now, and that uniformity of those cells, essentially, right, really doesn't make all that much sense. If you were even looking at the basic grand scheme of biomimetics, right? Biomimetics allows for differentiation, and in the interest of becoming more efficient at offering you know, cues on how we design things now, right? So it's really surprising that you can have this uniformity where we look at everything from a leaf cell, right? There is a clear-cut connection to the operations within, right? That's why we have similar stomata configurations in a leaf, but then it is a variation of it. There are variations of stomata as we follow along a plant, like a dandelion, along its stem, along its other parts, right? Which effectively are the same kind of makeup, but there's a different operations within inside, right? We look at your skin cells. The skin cell on, say, your eyelids are different from those which you find on the palm of, or the base of your foot, right? Even though they're both skin cells. So there is that variation that really isn't talked about in your discussion. More importantly, I think that, you know, coming back to an earlier point that Mark was raising, which is about, you know, if I jack this building up another 30 stories instead of just 10 stories, right? What's the difference, right? And the response was rather benign in not really expressing the relationship to the interior of what's going on, right? And Mark's, you know, kind of polarity or positioning of the two ways of operating in an office tower, for example, you know, whether it's the shell or whether it's the internal operations that determine it, I think you really were unaware of that kind of condition because you're so fixated on the cladding, right? So I think that at the very least, that has all these points are things that I think will have to be kind of clarified in some of the book that you're going to have to fix. For me, one of the things that came out in the presentation, we talked a lot about this in our earlier discussions, but I still think that there has to be a clarification in the kind of indoor environment that you create. I think that you make a big deal out of it in certain chapters in your book where you start talking about the indoor light qualities, which impact kind of operations. And it was raised in earlier reviews about the indoor environmental quality based on lighting. And you really never show us a really meaningful comparison. Yes, you do show us the kind of light levels in terms of the lux, but I think that, you know, if you remove the engineering and the science out of it, we would just like to know what is the overall improvement. Like, to me, coming back to an earlier statement about the nature of this kind of uniform, cladding, I looked at your section for a minute and I realized that on the north face, you pretty much have the same cladding as you do on the south face, right? And though I do get the kind of lighting effects that you've done in terms of the analysis, I still don't know, A, the overall benefit to having this on the north face, for example, and B, I really wish I could see the actual architectural implications as opposed to simply something that I would get from, say, my energy consultants to tell me that, you know, I've got a lot of heat gain, right? So that's just a lot of stuff right there. You and I are going to have to go through this after this, but I just want to make sure that I can outline all these comments right now while we have everyone else at the table so that they can chime in on any of these loose threads that maybe need to be further developed, or maybe I'm just going a little bit too hard edge on this, because I'm trying to cover everything from the basic taxonomy discussion to the kind of uniformity of cladding, to the basics of operations, to the kind of procedurals of how this thing was generated, to just for me, which was the notion of, is this an architectural application or fundamentally an application of a product that you've really developed, right?
I think I just want to add to that, Vince. I just want to say that I think, like, as architects, like, we are, I mean, we should be obsessive about what the experiential quality of the space is like. And it's one thing to be measured on something and say, you know, statistically, here's the science that supports what I'm saying. But it's another thing to say, you know, like, what does this thing feel like, right? How does it make you feel when you're inside it? What is the difference between 2 layers of pillows or no pillows and 1 layer of 2 layers of tight strung in tension plastic? Like, these are the things that I think, like, and I mean, like, we use renderings to convey that. We use VR, all kinds of different technologies, right, to kind of like evoke feeling of space. I think that's one of the elements that may be missing from this, is that, you know, what is it like when you start layering these things? What does that feel like inside space? Not what is the science behind it. Like, that's obviously, that's very, very important, because that's the validation factor, right? But the parts that's missing for me in this is the feeling, like the design aspect. What is, so what if the science says this? What does that look like? That's for me. Sorry.
Yeah, I would agree, and that's something that I have noted, and Ngan, we have talked about that, so we know that that's something that's going to have to be kind of popped in and really clarified in your final submission.
Well, I'll chime in regards to your comments, Vince. The presentation is, in my opinion, much better than your document, Ngan. I think your presentation is more clear as to what your intent is. It has a more cohesive sort of line of thought. And I had an easier time engaging with the material. The document shows that you were really excited about this. I think your material experimentations are quite compelling. And I could think that, you know, that could have been even sort of a larger part of your work, which I understand wasn't possible. But I agree with sort of the Mark and everyone else. I think the architecture dimension of it is, I think, what you really have to, well, the writing part needs some more specificity. There's a lot of terminology and there's a lot of claims that are made that are not quite precisely positioned. And I think there's easy for us, for instance, to say, okay, so plants moves towards light, right? That seems simple, but when you actually look at it closely, you realize that they're called tropism, and there's a series of types of tropisms, one of which is light, right? Other ones are water, other ones are forces, and so on. So even just like making a more concerted effort and looking at what those things actually come from and sourcing them might actually give you a better insight in how they have approached the definition, how other bio-inspired projects have worked like. I would suggest, for instance, something that relates to light. Look at the Flechtofin. It's a project developed in Germany by Julian Lienhardt. And he did this thing that is based on the flower of paradise. When you push it, they kind of bend. It's a bend active system. And they designed the 2012 pavilion for Vienna. And you can see an application where they take a very simple biomimetic principle and they show, for instance, how it works in a window, and it's like a product, it's a thing there. But then they actually develop it into an architectural potential where you can actually see that now it's actually informing the way the building operates. And perhaps is sort of greater aesthetic exchange. And as Vincent was saying, like what does it feel like when you're inside of there? What does it tell us about this sort of spatial qualities? Framing that a little bit better will help you a lot, and also make you a better designer, and also make you better at putting together an argument. Because your presentation is significantly better than your writing. Your writing and some of your diagrams will need substantial work to really highlight sort of the key findings and the key strengths of your work, so it doesn't get cluttered with things that are perhaps not as successful.
Thank you, David. Since we are really doing summation and I'm just looking at the time, maybe we invite Jason and then Vince to kind of give the last words.
Jason, go ahead, man.
Yeah, sure. So for me, it's the conclusion aspect. So that's one thing that I was looking for in your book, is this culmination of, all these concepts, the biomimetics, the materiality, the technology aspects, and how they sort of entwine together, and what what we were mentioning before, what are the advantages or disadvantages to this system that you've employed? And so for me, how do we showcase those aspects? Are you going to provide us some simulations, some screenshots of a video that might showcase different statuses that might highlight programmatic aspects or different time periods or maybe environments? Is it the difference between fall and summer, for example? I don't know. But what I'm also looking for is an addition of the bubbles being applied to your illuminance level diagrams. So there's a lot of structure. There's tension wires. There's steel grates. All of that is going to act as an opaque blocker to all of this illuminance levels that would potentially go into the building. And so that needs to be applied. These real life scenarios need to be showcased, because quite literally you're showing the modulation of light, and we need to see that. So how you draw difference in light, or how you communicate kinetics or movement, is very important in the conclusions of your presentation, I think.
Yeah, I think that falls into the same category of a lot of the comments that have been made. I put out all of the summation statements just because I want to get everyone's insights on it. Ngan, you've already got the book. I've marked it up, and I'm glad to see that a lot of, pretty much everything that's been said has been in some way or fashion articulated in the edits to the book that you're going to have to make. One thing that's still outstanding for me, and it's just an observation, and maybe my colleagues here who have read the book and have seen the presentation now, it seems very strange that you can really, as David said, you can see a lot of the enthusiasm at the outset of the book, right? Like, and it seems very strange that where the architectural design, which is I think one of the issues that a lot of the comments have been coming from, which is like where the architectural ambition, the kind of experience of space, all those dimensions are kind of fallen by the wayside by the time you get to the end of this, because it becomes a matter of like the gradients on the lux counts, right? So I think I want to find a way to make sure that, Ngan, if you could recapture some of that design ambition, like there's a reason, and I don't know where it is in the book, but there's a reason, for some reason, where the hexagon units that you had developed that were really cool and intricate, right, in the book, they somehow boil back down to those rectangular pillows, as David said, right? And I don't know and maybe it's some like Ngan-based Darwinianism or some selective breeding that kind of led to that kind of condition where it became that simplified grid. But I think it does merit explanation for some of these basic design decisions. And I'm not even saying that there's a lot of design necessarily that comes about, like, you know, in terms of like, obviously there's decisions made by data, but I think that you have to tell us at least that one gesture where you go from this really cool looking hexagon triangulated component, right, that you put in the book, right, and you come back to this rectangular grid, right?
Because when I try to put the material, the facade on the building, I was challenged by a lot of tectonic and the construction feasibility of the country. So I try to make it like in reality that it can be built, and it's not just arrive in the theoretical and hypothesis.
But I still think that it's... Go ahead, Mark.
We didn't want to see your face.
I just think one of your precedents is like, it's a really fantastic precedent, and I don't know like who pointed you to it, but the Mediatek building by Enrique Ruiz is, you know, this is like, I think a lot of the comments are like, you know, you don't just have to swathe the thing or blanket the thing in the pillows. I think there's more kind of nuanced depth that can happen. And so there should be, not should be, but there can be layers to this thing, right? That create different experiences based on different elements within the building. I think that seems to be like one massive like overarching theme here. And I just like, I reference that building again as because I think it's a fantastic precedent in the fact that you can actually trace, like this is architecture, right? On the outside of the building, it should actually, as well as the inside, like, yes, it's about experiential, but on the outside of the building, there's a language that comes as a result of what's inside. And I think right now that's what's missing, is that dynamic tension between the two things. Sorry.
No, I will add something to Mark there, and I shouldn't, but you know, that project is fascinating. Also because if you study it closely, you realize the operational costs are extremely high.
Exactly.
And if you study it further, you realize that those offices actually had a really, really hard time getting occupancy. So even most of the building has been empty for a while, and it's been a difficulty kind of maintaining tenants, partially because that control is tricky. So that's the part where, you know, there are projects out there that are exciting, but studying them closely is not to discourage you, but to actually, you know, build upon them.
To make it better, yeah.
Make them better, exactly, right?
Yeah.
And that's why it's important to be a little bit more diligent as to, you know, this was a great geometric solution. What other lessons can we learn from it, right?
Wow, that is a Mark, David, man, that is a very positive spin on this project. So thanks, kids.
Okay. I think we are coming back full circle, dwelling on some of the very similar points that we've raised. So I want you to have the last word, Ngan, before we wrap this up. Are there any other high-level comments that you want to make in response to the 2 or 3 really key points that we brought forward today, thanks to having Mark and David coming in as a guest critic and stirring up the dynamics a little bit different from the 3 of us, which is, you know, sometimes we keep on punching at the same things. So are there any high-level responses that you might have? If you don't, that's okay. Vince can take that forward with you. It's up to you.
So my facade is more focused more on the pattern of the unit. Like each unit has its own pattern that can be varied. But compared to ETFE and other daylighting building, this is more flexible because I can just 3D printed the mold forecast for pouring the silicon unit, and it can be like a process that be prefabricate and for more making, and this is more opportunities than the ETFE because they have frame and they very rigid compared to the more making of the silicon. So that's what I focus for the materialization.
Okay, thank you. I just want to throw in a bit of a comment. I think your statement kind of summarizes some of the concerns that we have, that you really just focus on the cladding as a product. And Mark and David and I and a few other people have been trying to kind of take you along and say, you know, yeah, you have a product. Yes, this is a good product, but how do we make architecture a little bit better with this product? So that's, I think Vincent's going to come back and drive that point through for you. I think I'm surmising that is the general response that we have for you. So I'm just going to ask my boss, Marco, do we just kick Ngan out and do we
Yeah,
bring
so
up?
we follow the similar procedure to what we do in the the in-person reviews, where we convene separately now, and the way to do that here is to ask Ngan to leave the meeting,
How
and
do we
then afterwards Vincent
Okay.
will contact you for a separate private Zoom meeting. So we'll end this now. We'll also stop live streaming and we'll stop recording. And we will continue our conversation in private. So Ngan, if you could leave us, we'll give you a big thank you for your presentation, and a thank you to our guest critics and committee, and thank you to anyone who was following along on the live stream. And we'll see you later this afternoon, hopefully, for the other reviews. And so we'll now convene in private. Thanks, Ngan.
Thank you.